Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about something that I consider to be a cheat code for size and strength. And it's interesting because I've seen some bodybuilding type coaches out there will say things like, oh, it doesn't work for either one, which is, again, truly fascinating to me because I've had enormously good experience with this with my lifters, with clients, and I know many other coaches who do also. In fact, the entire concept at Westside Barbell is more or less based upon the idea of at least half their training every week of hitting a max on a big lift and then doing supplemental work afterwards to get thicker, to get bigger for hypertrophy. Okay, and 50% of their workouts are built around this, and they produce tons of world record holders in powerlifting, and then it's branched out into other sports. And so to me, it's always fascinating that people don't get that. And the reality is, it works very well if you rotate the max effort lifts. And I think this is where people mess up on something like this, because I'll tell them, no, I mean, you can program to where you max and then you do all your accessory work afterwards, and you can do this every week year round. Whether you choose to do it 2 days or 4 days or whatever a week is a very different programming approach, of course. And the more traditional side of it from conjugate would be to do it twice a week. But where people mess up is they try to do the same lift over and over. And I think this is where we run into a lot of the issues where people burn out, where they run into overuse, other things, instead of rotating the lifts. Okay, so what do we mean by that? Doing variations. In other words, you don't just come in and hit a standard competition pause bench every time or a normal back squat. You can rotate close variations. You can do variations of the bench press. You can put bands, you can put chains on, you can change bars. You can change ranges of motion. What do we mean there? Well, you can have bars that let you go deeper than a normal bar would because they have a camber to them. You can do board work, pin work, so that you can make it a slightly shorter range of motion. You can do floor presses, right, which give you a very hard stop that will be usually for most people at least some reduction in the range of motion. But yeah, bands changing barbells. A lot of the bars change the grips. You can change your grip, right? You can max out on 5 different grip widths on the bench over a course of time. You have a closed grip, medium grip, you can do pinkies on the rings, you can do a wide grip where you're outside the rings, with most of the hand, or you can go all the way to illegal wide and max out. I don't recommend you do that often on that latter one because it can be a little hard on the shoulders to bench completely outside the rings, which is called illegal wide. But you've got a lot of variations, and the same thing can be applied to your squatting, your deadlifting. You can easily come up with as many squat variations, particularly with bands, chains, different bars. Doing box work at different heights. You can do wider stance, you can do narrow stance. Okay, you can rotate the lifts around that you're maxing on. This will avoid burnout. This will help with overuse. And if you're doing it this way, you're going to find it a lot more effective. And then afterwards, you can come in and do your volume work, whether it's 5s, 10s, 15s, whatever you're doing. Although, again, I will point out, doing large amounts of 5s afterwards will tend to beat you up. It's not something you want to do for long periods of time. Something you can do in certain phases of your training if you want. Okay, or oftentimes on the west side, they'll do it only on the max day. And then they'll go lighter for more rep work on their dynamic days after doing their speed work. But if you're going to run a system where we're maxing and then hitting volume, I'm going to push people more in the direction of sticking with mostly 8+ reps. Okay, in this way we maximize hypertrophy. So what do we get out of it? Well, we do get the best of both worlds. Training on maxes to where you're programming them carefully, and you're not doing too many ramp-up sets, you're not missing too many lifts, are actually easier on your recovery than people think it is. It really can be in terms of bouncing back. And what we find is that if you hit optimal training volumes afterwards, you will grow. You'll grow very, very well. And I think the issue we run into here is people who want to use junk volume, right? They are used to training with more volume than they need to really get good gains in muscle mass. This is where people run into a problem with this sort of approach. You need to have an idea of less is more. Since you hit a max already, you're going to attenuate upper threshold fibers better. And if you look at the data we have on that, what does it show? Well, that sort of pre-activation usually shows slightly improved performance on subsequent sets. right? And it also shows slightly better upper threshold muscle fiber and motor unit activation on subsequent sets. So let's say you hit a heavy bench, and then you're doing presses of some type, whether barbell or dumbbells or whatever, for tens afterwards. What you'll find is that that heavy single first tends to make you perform slightly better in the studies, on average, slightly better on those 10 rep sets. In other words, you can handle a little more weight for tens. Okay, so then we end up with more efficiency. The problem is, people will say, but then you've got to recover from all of it, and that's true. But so that also means you can't go hog wild on the volume. You can't have too much joint volume. And that's the issue many people have with their volume work anyways. They're not looking at the data. They're not looking at the information we have to figure out, hey, what's really good sweet spots? Where should we be on our volumes? Where should I be relative to my recovery right now based on how I feel? And if they don't do that and they end up throwing in 5 or 10 more sets of too much work, then sure, you can start to run into recovery issues. But if you keep it moderate and say, what would be the minimum amount of volume I need to do to see good gains in muscle mass, okay, that I know I can recover from. And if you do that after the heavy single, it tends to work really, really well. And again, it's the idea that, yeah, you are eating a little bit of recovery with the heavy work. That's true. But most people are training with more volumes than is optimal anyways. They had recovery to spare and they're wasting it on jump volume. And what we mean by jump volume is doing extra work that is not stimulating any new adaptation. Right? This is one reason we don't want to come in and do 5 really heavy singles for the max first. I'm not a fan of that. People will go, I'll come in and do 5 singles at 90%. It's like, well, you're not going to recover from that as easily. Right? That's going to be a recovery issue, and it's arguable if it's really making you stronger. Do you really think doing a couple extra singles at 90% is going to activate more strength or build more strength than just ramping up to 1 heavy single? Or you might have 2 or 3 that are above 90% because you're ramping to that training max till it feels really heavy. But then we're stopping there, and we're getting that 1 peak single that we know we're not going to come back and be able to replicate. Okay, that's going to give you a much more pronounced training response that's easier on recovery. So that's really the approach you need to take if you're going to do this. Don't try to come in and do 5 singles at 90% or higher. Right? Cap it at 3 or 4, and that's only because you're ramping to get to a heavy one. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.